Wiltshire is a county spurned by holidaymakers. It has no coastline, and on the chalk uplands above the Vale of Pewsey are mile upon mile of fields, some under plough, others just grazing land. Everyone seems to pass through Wiltshire on the way to somewhere else, to Somerset perhaps, or Devon, or Cornwall. Once, the Kennet and Avon Canal had been a major thoroughfare through the county, providing a link between the Thames estuary and the Bristol Channel, transporting agricultural goods, coal and stone. About 400 feet up, on a spur of the Downs, plumb in the centre of Wiltshire, is a town that benefited greatly from this canal, Devizes. What a quaint name, isn't it? Beloved, of course, by writers of limericks. It lines up with sizes and prizes, and crops up in many disguises. The derivation is from the Latin ad devizes, or ad devizes, as I was taught to say, which means on the boundaries. And the story of this place starts with the erection of a big castle by one of the bishops of Salisbury, probably early in the 12th century, at the point where the boundaries of three manors converged. This is not the bishop's castle, which was dismantled in 1646. What we see here on its site, and now divided into flats, is a pantomime recreation of the Victorian period. It might have been done for William Randolph Hearst, but here a local tradesman got in first. The site is wonderful. Perched upon a splendid motte or mound, it's dominated by a circular lookout turret. Surrounded by the driest of dry moats, a portion now is given up to goats. The last contribution to this amply conceived film set was this gate, like much of the rest in rock-faced stone. To understand the Devizes, one has to start with the castle, because the town grew up to serve it, and was planned in a segment of a circle below and around it. The streets run round in nearly concentric segments, and the ones farthest away were built up first, for the nearer area was long occupied by the castle's outer bailey. And the remarkable fact is that after over 800 years, this street pattern still survives, virtually intact. From the Middle Ages, apart from the plan, not much remains except the churches. St. Mary, St. James, and St. John. All three have beautiful towers. St. John's also has, at the southeast corner, the Beauchamp Chapel, a gorgeous affair, added about 1490 in the opulent manner characteristic of the Tudor period. The parapet is a special delight. great porch house probably dates from about 1480. The date 1450 on the gable looks a bit early. It has a well-carved barge board. Barge boards were both functional and ornamental, for they served to mask and protect from the weather the ends of the roof purlins, as well as providing the gable itself with a pleasing finish. This must have once been a house of some importance, sited in the evocatively named Monday Market Street. The town itself, in the late 15th century, like most others in England, was probably entirely timber-framed. Most of those flimsy houses have disappeared, but a few survive. More, in fact, than we might suppose, because some were later provided with new brick fronts. This range, of about the same date as the Beauchamp Chapel, is humble indeed by comparison, and today is looking very sorry for itself. The most enjoyable range of timber-framed houses in Devizes is this one, built in the 16th century and given new windows in the 18th century. If the timbers were originally exposed, as I expect they were, they've long since been plastered over for greater warmth, and as the Georgians would have thought, for better appearance also. At number 1, after the laths had decayed and the oak framework had been found to be riddled with death-watch beetle, one section was uncovered. This revealed that the infill downstairs was brick, some of it laid in herringbone fashion. This has been left exposed. Though interesting in itself, that doesn't of course suit the unity of the rest. The Elm Tree Inn is a Jacobean timber-frame building that has been tarted up recently with considerable flair. The eau de Nil and white colour scheme is certainly very welcome, for upstairs the timbers have been smothered with that most repellent material, pebble dash. Here, alas, the pebble dash shows much more obviously. I'm reminded of that story of a Frenchman who was presented with a plate of porridge. Very interesting, he said, but what does one do with it? Does one eat it, or has one already eaten it? In 1724, Daniel Defoe recorded that the Devizes, the prefix "the" was still in general use as late as this. The Devizes is full of wealthy clothiers engaged in the manufacture of mixed cloths, such as are usually worn in England by the better sort of people. The flourishing of the English wool trade in the 18th century brought new prosperity to the town. And Devizes became, what to a large extent it still remains, a Georgian brick town. Suitable clay for brickmaking was found not far away, and this was fully exploited. Was the high quality of brickwork confined to the big houses? Look at this one, with gauged brickwork in all the window heads. This building has been recently cleaned, so we can appreciate to the full the excellence of the brick craftsmanship. The Castle Hotel is in a more relaxed style suitable to a pub, but how delightful, with its white trim and its mansard or double-pitched roof with very big slates. In marked contrast with many other towns, there was at Devizes plenty of room for expansion on what had been the castle's enormous outer bailey. So here, in the course of the 18th century, there gradually came into being the largest marketplace in the west of England. Ranged around an excellent market cross erected in 1814 in Bath stone, this marketplace is the town's focal point. Spacious, architecturally wonderfully varied, and almost wholly delightful. The story really starts in the reign of Queen Anne. This house, set back from the marketplace, has been much altered, but still preserves its shell canopy over the doorway, supported on double scroll brackets carved with acanthus ornament. From this time also date very handsome gate piers, topped by stone urns. Next door is a splendid example of a town house, very much in the tradition of Sir Christopher Wren, and dating from about 1720. It's a pity that it isn't quite symmetrical. The brickwork looks more precise even than it is, because it is tuck-pointed. The idea was to produce the effect of really refined brickwork without having specially made smooth bricks. And so they pointed with a mortar of the same colour as the bricks themselves. And then, while it was still damp, the mortar courses were scored with narrow grooves, into which were pressed thin ribbons no more than 1/8 of an inch wide, of a contrasting colour, generally as here chalk lime putty. This was a typical Georgian refinement. Undoubtedly by the same builder, but still finer, is Brownstone House. Here special bricks were used, so there was no call for tuck pointing. The deep red rubbed brickwork is extremely good. Notice the very close mortar joints. With their thin glazing bars, the windows were clearly renewed about the end of the 18th century. All the dressings here are of limestone. The central door is approached by 5 semicircular steps of diminishing radius, and surmounted by a jolly little Cupid's head set against a pair of folded wings. But what has our own century contributed to this house? A new roof. Just look at it. These harsh machine-made tiles on a building of this quality are shocking. And how any responsible person came to authorize them is a mystery. Devizes has no stone suitable for building in the immediate vicinity. Bath stone could be brought up the Avon to Milksham without difficulty. But though only 7 miles away, Milksham is 300 feet lower. Thus, before the opening of the Kennet and Avon Canal, there would have been a long uphill haul at the end of the journey. Nevertheless, in addition to the medieval churches, there are in the town a number of stone, or at least stone-faced, buildings which antedate the construction of the canal. This is one, Parnella House, built about 1740. It's nothing if not provincial, ham-fisted in fact. The Venetian windows on the first floor really make no sense at all. The raised centre of each has to be blocked to accommodate the floor of the upper story. How inept, too, is the statue of Aesculapius, the god of medicine, in the niche. But the man who built this house, presumably a doctor, had classical pretensions, and he wanted a screen of columns. So stone was very desirable here. The builders used it, and they got it from the direction of Bath, as they did also for the facing of the clock house. The clock house isn't a very skillful building either. An architect who knew his classical onions would have had 3 windows on the front, or 5, not 4. With the use of engaged columns, 4 windows means that one column has to be exactly under the apex of the pediment, which is wrong. It turns the elevation into a duality. Still, the building is not without its attractions, and would have been better if the rusticated ground floor had remained completely open, as it was when the undercroft was used as a cheese market. 100 yards or so away is something far more accomplished, the Town Hall of 1806-8. It's pleasingly symmetrical, but notice the arrangement of the columns. Here, the building has not been split down the middle. No wonder this is so elegant, for not only was the stone brought from near Bath, but the architect too, Thomas Baldwin, who was responsible as city surveyor for some of that city's most important works. Baldwin's Town Hall is surely the gem among the buildings of Devizes, a work of exquisite grace and refinement, and with first-class masoncraft too. This is one of the few buildings refronted with Bath stone before 1810, the date when the Kennet and Avon Canal was at last opened. The long climb from the Avon Valley to Devizes was the big challenge for the engineer. And he was none other than John Rennie, famous for his Waterloo Bridge. Within 2¼ miles, there are 29 locks, the second longest flight in England. It was, of course, here as elsewhere, the coming of the railway which finally killed the canal. And today, alas, the cane flight is derelict, and the large pounds to the side of each lock are usually dry. Since the 1960s, restoration work has been undertaken by the British Waterways Board and the Kennet and Avon Canal Trust. This trust is a private organisation of canal enthusiasts and plays a crucial role in providing finance. The planned target is to reopen the flight of locks within the next 10 years. But in its heyday, the Kennet and Avon Canal changed the face of Devizes. Bath stone travelled as never before, and incidentally became one of the least expensive limestones in the country. And a whole string of buildings was faced or refaced with this material. For public buildings, needless to say, stone was now employed as a matter of course. This is the Assize Court, with a very imposing Grecian-style front by T.H. Watt, designed in 1835. Here, in Bath stone, is expressed the full majesty of the law, and no mistake. Of exactly the same date, but much more relaxed, is the Market Hall. The front is plain, but dignified, with a well-designed clock tower. By contrast, here is a robust, if somewhat florid design, the Corn Exchange, built in 1857. Aloft is an outsized statue of Ceres, but the stonework isn't so good here. It must have come from a different quarry. Poor Ceres. Some people, reluctant to go to the expense of bringing in stone, but feeling that brick didn't look quite classy enough, resorted to stucco. Here's one example, dated 1740 on a rainwater head, and with those thick glazing bars obviously no later than that. The stucco, of course, was a much more recent addition. In the first part of the 19th century, there was such a vogue for stucco that some people still preferred it to stone. This one, Hilworth House, is a characteristic case. A Regency villa with wings added about 1840. A house of real character. Stucco offers plenty of opportunities for added colour, as is illustrated by two houses a few doors away. These two houses are a pair, semi-detached that is, yet having nothing whatever to do with one another. One has painted its stucco like this, the other like this. I leave you to decide which you prefer. The Victorians went back to brick, and very good brick too in the best examples. Look at this. Portland and Bath stone dressing is applied to brickwork of magnificent quality. Some of it rubbed and some carved, as it occasionally was in the time of Charles II and Queen Anne. And the date? 1892. Well, we're back in the marketplace, the largest, remember, in the southwest. And that's where I want to leave you, because the architecture of the marketplace constitutes a kind of synthesis of much of what Devizes has to offer, good and bad. There's very little, let me add, that's bad. Let's look first at the Bear, which has been the leading hotel here for over 200 years. What would Devizes be without the Bear, they ask? And the answer is, wait for it, unbearable. The Bear comprises two buildings which couldn't appear more different. The right-hand part is in fact the earlier, originally timber-framed with comparatively low rooms. It was refronted in brick in the time of Queen Anne and faced with stucco during the Regency period, when it got the grandly self-confident gilt lettering. It's the left-hand part which is much more distinguished architecturally. This dates from the time of George III, and the front is entirely faced with Bath stone. Look especially at the central window on the first floor. The architrave is enriched as it could never have been in brick, and to either side are medallions with flowers and hanging garlands. Yet, move round the corner, and what do we find? Again, just brick. The marketplace narrows towards the northwest, and there, closing the view, is the brewery of 1885. Red brick again. On this important site, What a mercy not to find a block of flats or offices of a similar height. The brewery is perhaps a bit overpowering, but it is undeniably a building of character, and has, in my opinion rightly, been scheduled Grade 2. On the southwest side of the marketplace there's a gap. Should we say a rather ominous gap? I hope not, but look what happened a few years ago opposite. The flavour of the marketplace, deriving from a delightful architectural patchwork of colours, textures, and a nice variety of materials, was brutally soured. At least this building doesn't rise too high, but in every other respect it is a visual offence, isn't it? And then there are those dreadful concrete lamp standards. What did the marketplace do to deserve them?
Our steel industry, alas, is in the doldrums. Perhaps it would be a tiny bit less so if local authorities in England, like their counterparts in West Germany, would commission steel lamp standards. Some concrete posts are visually more acceptable than they used to be, but they're always too thick. In my opinion, all lamp standards nowadays should be made of steel. We need thousands of them. Concrete may be cheaper, but visually the cost of eyesores such as these is enormous. They're especially offensive in Devizes. So much here is so good.
The town is fortunate in having a large concentration of historic buildings of individual character within a very small area. Within a quarter of a square mile, there are nearly 500 structures considered by the Department of the Environment to be worthy of listing for some protection. The town has a population of 10,500, but it is a flourishing local centre for as many as 25,000 because its catchment area is wide. For this town, remember, with its delightful and varied architectural heritage, is admirably situated at the very centre of that beautiful and so often underrated county of Wiltshire.